Hi guys, and welcome to Dee's Media World. Today I am finally doing the review for Chi-Raq. I know I had mentioned a while ago that I was going to have to see the movie and do a review on it, but I actually hadn't been able to. And then today I saw on Amazon Prime that they actually have the movie up and I could actually see it for myself. So I was really excited about that, and now I could finally do the review. If you have been following my channel, about 2 months, maybe 3 months ago, I did a review for the trailer, and I watched the trailer and sort of talked about how there was a controversy surrounding this film by Spike Lee. Basically, there were two things people were really pissed about. One of them being that the film being called Chi-Raq, implying that it's as violent as Iraq, and that there's all this violence in Chicago, and it's basically gang city is one thing, and people were just offended by that. So most of those people who felt that way probably didn't see the movie anyway. And the second type of people were upset that the movie was about a young woman basically rallying other young women, or women, all women actually, to stop having sex with their partners, their husbands, whoever, to stop war. Because this is actually something that happened in real life. In what country was it? Liberia, where they had a sex strike. And basically, it's also based off a play as well. Even the characters are named out of the named from the same characters from the play. Lysistra, I think is how, no, Lysistrata, something like that, is what the play that's originally called. So I finally got to see the film today, and now I'm just doing my review. I've avoided a lot of reviews from this film, but I did hear, the only thing I really heard mostly was, the biggest criticism I heard was that the film was a little too light on the humor and was not taken serious. It wasn't a serious movie, basically. Like, people thought they were taking too much, I guess, making it was a satire, which I said when I did the review of the trailer that it was always a satire, and that, it's not meant to be taken seriously. And some people, I guess, were hoping that this film would actually sort of give a modern, realistic solution to the problem, which I could understand. But let me go into what the film generally about is. I described it is the main woman, played by Teyonah Parris. This is actually the third time I've talked about something she's been in. She's been in Dear White People, and she's been in Survivor's Remorse, and now she's in Chi-Raq. And she's the girlfriend of Nick Cannon's character. His name is actually, I'm going to talk about this later. His character's name is Chi-Raq, but his real name is like Demetrius or something. And he's one of the gangsters. He's the leader of the gangsters called the Spartans. Subtle, right? The Spartans, and they basically are in love or whatever. And there's so much violence in the city. There's a lot of violence in the city or whatever. And she kind of decides after the death of, well, she doesn't really decide. She actually gets influenced by Angela Bassett's character. What's Angela Bassett's character? Miss Helen. She gets influenced by her character to start a sex strike and to stop have sex with these men, because maybe that will change their way. It's worked in Liberia. It's worked in old times, basically. Maybe they can try it here. And this was influenced by the death of Jennifer Hudson's daughter in the movie. Jennifer Hudson lost her daughter, and nobody is saying nothing about who did it and all that kind of stuff. And after seeing, this violence, she kind of Lysistrata, I'm going to say Teyonah Parris's character, gets sort of blamed a little bit as well, because she's obviously in a relationship with Nick Cannon's character, and she feels that she should do something to stop all this gang violence and this violence and all that stuff. That's essentially the plot. They basically start a sex strike, and this sex strike kind of has a domino effect. The domino effect here is what probably is. There are two things that I think people were pissed when they saw this movie. The one thing, the people who did see this movie, the one thing is the idea that a lot of people feel that a woman technically doesn't have that much power. In a way, people who are saying that, this idea of a woman having a sex strike was foolish, because, women don't really have that much power, and that it's not women's fault that men are violent. In other words, why are women sort of being blamed for men being violent? Like, of course, oh, well, because I have sex with him, he continues to be violent. He doesn't have his, responsibility of his own. It's mostly blamed on me. And I can understand that perspective. But I think the film, and I know a lot of people hated that, in a way, I think the film, in its own messy way, was trying to say, it's not necessarily all on the women's shoulders to change how men are. I mean, even in the film itself, Angela Bassett's character is like, you can't actually change a person; they have to change themselves. But I think the film was trying to say that everyone can kind of play a part. But I don't think the film focused enough on the men's side and the men's playing a part in stopping the violence. So I definitely could see that. The film overall, I think I'm not sure how I feel about this movie, to be honest. Like with other films I've talked about on this channel, like Dear White People, I had a strong feeling toward it. But this film was so kind of messy in a way. It had a lot going on, but at the same time it didn't. It was for starters, the prose in this film, there's a lot of moments in the film where the characters speak in prose and they speak in rhyme or whatever, just like out of a play. And I wasn't expecting that. I'm actually not a fan of that. In the 90s, there was a Romeo and Juliet film with Leonardo DiCaprio and Claire Danes, where everyone's probably heard of that movie, where it's set in modern times, but the language is all in the Shakespearean speech or whatever, and I hated that. And this film kind of brought that back to me, where I still don't like them constantly. It felt silly. It felt silly to me, and not in a fun way, but in silly, and is it really necessary for these characters to consistently rhyme and speak in prose and stuff? It's the same thing with like for Colored Girls, the Tyler Perry version, where out of nowhere they kind of are speaking in prose. This film, there's more consistency to the prose, but I still didn't like it. I found it distracting and I found it annoying. And sometimes the actors or actresses, they were into it. I did see them trying their best, but I still couldn't like be into it myself. I just found it kind of annoying. I was like, can't these people just speak like regular people? And that's kind of what makes it kind of a silly movie and why some people probably couldn't take it seriously. I thought it was strange as well for the main character, his boyfriend, Nick Cannon's name is actually Chi-Raq. And I know that was a little on the nose, but I don't know. I thought that was a little much. They don't really explain. In a way, he's a violent person or whatever. He's a gangster, but the film never really goes into too much into why he's that way. Like his dad and his mom, his dad was a gangster at some point, but he didn't even know his dad. And the moment he talks about his mom, isn't truly relevant to why he is the way he is. And I was kind of wondering more like, well, why is he the way he is, and why is he insistent on being so, continuing to be violent? Heck, even Wesley Snipes, who plays Cyclops, who's the other gangster, he's the opposite gangster. They wear orange. Even speaking of Wesley Snipes, he's another person in this movie. Why people think movie is probably too silly is that it's funny, he's played a lot of serious roles. He's played a lot of gangster-ish, not gangster-ish, but what's the word I'm looking for? Like, you could believe he's a badass kind of roles. And here he's supposed to be like this gangster from, I don't even know what side of town or whatever. He's the other gangster, the opposite gangster to Nick Cannon. And he's just kind of silly. Like, anytime he speaks, it's supposed to be silly, and he's trying to crack jokes, and it's really awkward to watch at times. And I can see why people don't take that fully seriously. Wesley Snipes and Nick Cannon were both hard to believe as gangsters. I think Nick Cannon pulled it off a little more because I think he took the role more seriously. Whereas Wesley Snipes, how he was written and how he acted, was kind of having too much fun with it in a way. And that didn't. I don't think that had a good balance with those two characters. And there's a lot of celebrities in this movie. There's Samuel L. Jackson, Jennifer Hudson, Teyonah Parris, Nick Cannon, Wesley Snipes. Dave Chappelle makes an appearance in this movie. He doesn't really have a character. John Cusack is the priest in the movie. There's a lot of there's the guy even from that first Tyler Perry movie who plays one of the other men in the movie. Oh, even Lala is in here. And speaking also along the sides of the satire, kind of all over the place with this review, because this movie is kind of all over the place. The whole scene, or the whole idea of her going over there and getting all the women in town to do the sex strike, to me was not believable enough. Like, I can somewhat buy that all the women in a town might do something like this, but her level of getting them to do it seemed too easy. Like, she literally goes over, her and her friends who are so she's the purple side, Nick Cannon's purple. The opposite girl, Lala's character is the orange gangster. She's not the girlfriend of the gangster, but she's on the other side. they literally go over to their house. I mean, they have like a little spat or whatever. Like, oh, how dare you come over here? You're a Trojan. I'm a Spartan. Whatever. And they literally go in, they talk about it, and then there's maybe one or two girls who are like, I don't know if I can do this. But it literally takes like one conversation and some prose to sort of convince them to do this sex strike, which seemingly comes out of nowhere, like this idea of a sex strike. And I was like, I don't know if I buy that every woman in town would actually do this and say that they would do it and then actually do it. I mean, there's one scene where Nick Cannon's character does have sex with some girl. I don't even know who she was. I actually thought it would have been interesting. Heck, if the movie was going to be about a sex strike, I think it would have been more interesting if we saw the struggle on both sides, like for both men and women. We mostly saw the men, and I think someone has said this as well, is that part of the reason the movie didn't have a lot of favor when it comes to this idea of a sex strike is that it seems so one-sided. Like, women could totally go without sex, but men are the ones who are dying and having the problems, and they'll stop violence to have sex again. But women, they won't be tempted or anything like that. And I could definitely see that, especially where every woman seems to not have a problem doing the sex strike. I would think there at least been one who have been like, nah, this ain't gonna work for me. Speaking of women as well, I thought what made it silly too was that they tried to make it us believe that women all over the world were actually following this sex strike. Like, I wrote down some of the countries: Brazil, India, Australia, Denmark, Canada. I think Pakistan was one of the countries as well. Like, countries from like with all kinds of religions. Oh, Japan was in there. All these different religion, just everywhere all over the world. We're actually finding out about this sex strike and doing it as well. I think the biggest problem the movie had with that is there's so many problems, is that I didn't really find it believable. This never happens. I don't find it believable that no one would have been raped, as bad as that sounds. Like, this world, they kind of ignore the rape culture that kind of happens, would happen in real life. Like, it's hard for me to believe that, it's hard enough to believe that every woman in town would actually go along with this sex strike. But it's even harder for me to believe that none of the men who are gangsters, apparently, thugs, gangsters, whatever, have no real moral code, as they say, didn't rape any of these girls or rape their girlfriends or anything like that. Like, even there's briefly a moment where Tiana Paris's character is like, if your man forces you, you still have to say no. And I'm thinking, well, what if he doesn't just accept no? That should have been, I think, a legitimate question. Like, what if this guy who you're with doesn't take no and rapes you? What then? No one talks about that at all. That's not even mentioned in this entire movie. And I think some people might have said that as well as a criticism. And that's kind of what doesn't make it realistic. I don't really buy that every guy in town, old, young, middle-aged, is not having sex because all the women stop having sex with them and nobody gets raped and there's no sexual assault. And in fact, the fact that there's not even more violence actually as a result seems unlikely. Let me make sure the camera's still on. Okay, good. That just seemed kind of unlikely to be. And that's probably why people don't really buy this movie seriously. I will give this movie this. Most Spike Lee films kind of have this effect of being something to talk about. I will always give Spike Lee credit in saying that his films will at least make you think and have something to discuss. Whether or not you think the movie is complete garbage or the best thing in the world or the best thing he's done in years, there at least, you can't just walk away from it not feeling something, even if it's rage or just confusion. Because I think that was mostly how I felt. Because this movie wasn't that good, in my opinion, and I saw what Spike Lee was trying to do. I think there were some scenes that were too weird, and then there's some scenes that were way too long. Like when Jennifer Hudson's daughter dies and they have the funeral, that scene had to have been going on for 10-15 minutes. Like just John Cusack preaching for 10-15 minutes. And some people might love that, but I was dying watching that. And there's some other scenes in the film that I was just so bored. Let's see what's some of my other notes. Yeah, I've still found the prose to be annoying all throughout the whole film. Because sometimes they did it, sometimes they didn't. And just in general, like just doing that at all and it's not a joke is really freaking annoying to me. There was one weird scene where the girls go to this guy named General King Kong, and it's kind of long too, and she basically does all this to sort of seduce him into a position. And I think all the women are doing this. So they're seducing the officers, and she takes down a Confederate flag, and I didn't know the purpose of that scene. Not because it just didn't seem realistic that every girl would have the power of seduction to seduce like all the army guys or whatever type of military men they were there to. And I think that's probably the biggest problem, is that it's hard to believe that everybody would actually go with this and every woman would be able to seduce all those men, and that no rape would happen and just all this kind of stuff. It was really set sort of in a fantasy land, and I think that's what pissed people off. Like, the movie didn't take it seriously enough and say, what actually would have happened or what actually could happen or actual solutions to the violence in Chicago. I thought that was one of the strangest things I've seen, except until I saw like the last 20 minutes of this movie, which has to be, let's just skip to that part. The ending of this film. So basically at this point in the movie, all the women around the world are doing a sex strike. I think this congressman, maybe the mayor, I think the mayor of Chicago or whatever, is getting the blame from the president. Now, this was silly. The president of the United States actually has found out about the sex strike or whatever, obviously. And even his wife, who I'm not sure if they said it was Barack, because obviously Obama's still in office. I'm not sure if they were implying that him or it was just a president in general, I don't remember, was saying that he actually is on his wife, the president's wife, was actually on a sex strike as well, and was blaming the mayor for this. And I was thinking, that has to be a joke, because that didn't make, there was just so many weird jokes here. And like, there's a scene where the mayor goes to have sex with his wife, and he's an Egyptian prince or something, and she's supposed to be I don't know, that was a strange scene too. But anyway, this all leads up to everybody in the world is doing this strike, and apparently, is it still? Oh, okay. Apparently, it's working or whatever, and the president, the mayor's like, okay, we got to stop this or whatever. Eventually, this all leads down to a sex showdown, which, when I saw and heard this scene, I didn't know what the hell I was watching at this point. It was the strangest thing I've seen in a long time. I mean, the sex strike, so they have been on strike for 3 months, which really isn't that long in my opinion. And Chi-Raq, or what's this, Demetrius or whatever, he's kind of the only one stubborn, which that's hard to believe. And they decide to have a truce or whatever, where it's a sex showdown, and whoever comes first is the loser. And it's just the weirdest. It's just, and then the whole world, the whole town is watching this. I'm trying to even describe it. So they go, Chi-Raq and Tiana Paris's character, they go into, I guess, a gym or whatever, and they're supposed to have sex, and whoever comes first loses. And loses means if Tiana Paris wins, then she gets peace or whatever. They get rid of the guns, I guess, whatever. And if he wins, then they continue the way they are. Again, they don't explain, why he continues to want violence, because how does he benefit from it? They don't really go into his psyche enough, in my opinion, to explain why he feels so much power to fight it, and him by himself. Because every other guy in town just wants to have sex again, but he's the one who's like, I want to have sex again, but at the same time, I actually like the guns and the being a gang leader and whatever. I don't know. And it's so strange. It's such a strange scene. It might be up there with, like, it's one of the weirdest concepts I've seen in a movie like this. Like, if somebody was watching this film, they probably would have turned it off around the preacher scene or around a lot of the other scenes. But this was when I was like, I was actually really interested to see where this was going to go. But I would put that up there with the top strangest things I've seen. And I haven't even seen every Spike Lee film, and I know Spike Lee sort of has these kind of movies where they make people think, but also has some weird stuff. That was so strange. And they have sex or whatever. There's all this dirty talk, which was uncomfortable to watch. But luckily, I was watching it by myself. All this dirty talk. They have sex, and they actually both come at the same time, but somehow this still leads to her getting her peace. And the end of the movie kind of is like, the end of the movie was actually interesting. The Cyclops decide to not be in the gang anymore, They would rather be with women. They're women. And my problem with this as well, another flaw with this idea is that, so what happens after they have sex again? Like, couldn't they just go back to violence? Or is it going to be like this continuous cycle? Like, okay, I'll be good, just like how some people's relationships really are. The man will be like, I'll be good, I'll do what you want, whatever, have sex with me. And then the woman will be like, okay, I'll have sex with you. But then he'll mess up again, and then you have to do it again. And it's like this continuous cycle. Like, it's hard for me to believe that the guys would actually agree to this truce about, not having, you can have sex if you just stop the violence. And then they get the sex, and then they actually continue to not be violent. Like, that's kind of hard for me to buy, especially in this kind of setting. Like, I just don't believe that. But they did take away all the guns, apparently. And the end of the movie, everyone's wearing white and everything. And then there's a scene where Angela Bassett, because she's a great actress, basically has this emotional scene with Nick Cannon's character telling him that, long story short, telling him that his father killed her daughter and confessed to it. And that she said back then it was rare for someone to kill a child and get away with it or something. Like, she said that if a gangster or whatever killed a child, an innocent child, then they would either have to confess to the mother that he did it, or that he would be killed. And I guess there was some type of, the assumption is that there was some type of, camaraderie. There was some type of limits. There was limits. Like, killing children wasn't acceptable. But even now, and the reason that was kind of confusing too is that it's still not acceptable to kill children, though. Like, it's not like people said, oh, okay, it's a child. Who cares? They get killed every day. Like, people still feel that children shouldn't be harmed and just standing in the way, being a bystander. But anyway, she says that his father actually killed her daughter and that he went to jail and I guess was killed in jail. And then Nick Cannon admits to Jennifer Hudson that he accidentally killed her daughter, which she cries about. I need to talk about Jennifer Hudson. This video might have to be 2 parts long. Because my video limit's about to go out. So let me end this here, and I'll talk about the rest in part 2.